Hello and welcome to our podcast episode number 46, A Chilling Tale of Love, Betrayal and Immortality. I am Timothy and I am here with my dear friend Thomas. Today we're going to talk about a film called The Wisdom of Crocodiles. There will be spoilers. The Wisdom of Crocodiles is a 1998 British romantic thriller film directed by Po Cha Leong and starring Jude Law. It is based on the book of the same name by Paul Hoffman. Tom A.M., did you enjoy The Wisdom of Crocodiles?
Hello, Tim. It's always lovely to be here with you. Even if we are discussing something as dark and morose as this film, to answer your question, I didn't particularly enjoy The Wisdom of Crocodiles. While the premise was intriguing, I found it difficult to connect emotionally with the characters or the story itself. It felt more like a cold clinical examination of human nature rather than an engaging cinematic experience. However, I do appreciate the unique approach they took in this film and how it explored themes of love, obsession, and mortality.
Well, Tom, I always enjoy hearing your thoughts on these films. But I have to say I somewhat disagree with you about The Wisdom of Crocodiles. While it is true that the story can be quite chilling at times, I believe the filmmakers did an excellent job of creating a sense of unease and tension throughout the entire film.
Oh, Tim. You always find something to like in these dark films, don't you? But let's not get ahead of ourselves here. Why don't we discuss our initial thoughts on the characters and the actors who played them? What did you think about Jude Law as Stephen Grost's, the charming but deadly vampire?
Well, Thomas, I have to say that Jude Law was quite convincing in his role as Stephen Grost's. He managed to portray both the charming and deadly aspects of the character very well. However, I did find myself somewhat disappointed with the development of his character throughout the film. There wasn't really much growth or evolution, which made it difficult for me to empathize with him or root for him in any way. But maybe that was the point, to show how even someone as monstrous as Stephen could still have moments of vulnerability and longing.
I agree. Jude Law did a fantastic job portraying the complexities of Stephen's character. He had this duality about him that made it hard to completely hate him or root for him entirely. However, I found myself struggling with understanding why he chose to lead such a solitary life if his only way to survive was through love and connection with others. It seemed like there were more effective ways for him to find victims without getting attached in the process. But maybe that's just me projecting my own ideas onto this fictional character?
Well, Tom, I think you might have a point there. The film does hint at Stephen's loneliness and desire for connection, but perhaps he became so consumed by his need for survival that he lost sight of any other emotions or desires. It is interesting to consider how different characters interpret this story, though. Some might argue that Stephen is a tragic figure who simply cannot escape his fate, while others might view him as a ruthless killer who deserves no sympathy whatsoever.
Absolutely, Tim. The Wisdom of Crocodiles certainly leaves room for interpretation and debate. And speaking of debatable characters, let's talk about Anne Levels, played by Jacqueline McKenzie. Her character goes through quite the transformation throughout the film, from a strong-willed, independent woman to someone who is deeply affected by Stephen's charm and eventual love confession. What did you think about her character arc?
Well, Tom, I have to admit that Anne's character arc was indeed interesting, but also somewhat troubling for me personally. On one hand, it felt like she was finally able to break free from societal expectations and embrace her own desires and feelings towards Stephen. However, on the other hand, there was an element of manipulation at play as well, both by Stephen and by Anne herself. I couldn't help but wonder if her decision to stay with Stephen, despite knowing his true nature, was truly based on love or some other form of emotional dependence.
That's a valid point, Tim. It's clear that both characters have their own issues and desires that drive them towards each other throughout the film. Their relationship is marked by an intense push-pull dynamic where they both struggle with wanting to connect while also maintaining control over their respective fates. And speaking of fates, let's talk about the ending of the Wisdom of Crocodiles. What did you think about Stephen's final moments and his ultimate decision to share his story with Anne?
Well, Tom, I have to say that while it was tragic to see Stephen dying, slowly due to his inability to find a solution to his predicament, I found some solace in the fact that he chose to confide in Anne about his true nature. It showed that despite all of his wrongdoings and dark secrets, there was still an aspect of humanity within him, a desire for connection and understanding, even when facing death. As for Anne's decision to leave Stephen after hearing his story, I can only speculate that perhaps she felt it was the only way to truly let go and move on from their tumultuous relationship.
That's an interesting perspective, Ty. It does seem like both characters are trying their best to cope with the complexities of their situation while also grappling with their own feelings and desires. And while The Wisdom of Crocodiles may not have been a perfect film for me personally, I can appreciate its exploration of deep themes such as love, obsession, and mortality.
Absolutely, Tom. Despite its flaws, or perhaps because of them, The Wisdom of Crocodiles remains an intriguing and thought-provoking film that forces us to confront some uncomfortable truths about ourselves and our relationships with others. It's a haunting tale that will undoubtedly linger in the minds of viewers long after they've finished watching it.
Indeed. Tim, it's fascinating how this film manages to explore such heavy themes while still maintaining a sense of mystery and intrigue throughout its runtime. Speaking of which, did you know that there was actually some controversy surrounding the casting of Jude Law in this role? Some fans were initially disappointed that he had been chosen for the part, as they felt he didn't fit the traditional image of a vampire with his dark hair and piercing blue eyes. However, after seeing his performance, it seems their concerns were quickly allayed.
That's quite interesting, Tom. I remember hearing something about that controversy, but I didn't realize it was so significant. It just goes to show how much an actor can transform themselves both physically and emotionally when they really commit to a role. And speaking of transformation, did you know that the director Po Chi Leong originally wanted to cast Ralph Fiennes in the lead role, but ultimately decided against it due to scheduling conflicts?
I didn't know that, Tim. It's hard to imagine anyone other than Jude Law playing this part now. And while we're on the subject of trivia, did you know that The Wisdom of Crocodiles was actually adapted from a stage play by Paul Hoffman? The filmmakers had to make some significant changes to the original story in order to better translate it for the screen, but overall, I think they did an excellent job capturing the essence of Hoffman's vision.
That's a fascinating bit of information, Tom. It's always interesting to see how stories evolve from their original medium into something completely new and unique on screen. And speaking of unique, what did you think about the cinematography in this film? I thought it was particularly striking with its use of shadows and light to emphasize both the characters' internal struggles as well as their external conflicts.
Precisely, Tim. The cinematography really added another layer of depth and emotion to an already complex story. It felt almost like a character in itself, guiding our eyes towards important details while also creating an atmosphere of unease throughout the entire film. And speaking of atmosphere, can we take a moment to appreciate the haunting score composed by Craig Armstrong? I thought it was precisely brilliant how he managed to capture both the melancholy and the menace present in this story. with his music.
Well, said Tom, the music certainly played an integral role in enhancing the overall viewing experience of the Wisdom of Crocodiles. And lastly, before we wrap things up for today, I wanted to touch upon one more aspect that really stood out to me about this film. The performances by both Jude Law and Jacqueline McKenzie were precisely brilliant. They managed to bring their characters to life with such passion and intensity that it was impossible not to get caught up in their stories.
I completely agree, Tim. Both Jude Law and Jacqueline McKenzie did an incredible job portraying these complex characters who are struggling with deep-seated issues of love, obsession, and mortality. Their performances made this film all the more memorable for me personally and demonstrated, once again, why they're both such talented actors in their respective fields. As we come to the end of our discussion about the Wisdom of Crocodiles, it's clear that there are many layers to this fascinating story which continue to resonate with viewers even today. From its intriguing themes to its exceptional cast and crew, this film is definitely worth a watch for anyone interested in exploring the darker side of love and obsession. And who knows, maybe you'll discover something new about yourself in the process as well.
Indeed, Tom, it's clear that both characters are grappling with intense emotions throughout the film. Speaking of the book, I recently had a chance to read The Wisdom of Crocodiles by Paul Hoffman and was surprised at how different the story is from its cinematic adaptation. While the core themes of love, obsession, and mortality remain intact, there are several key plot points that were altered or omitted entirely for the sake of brevity or pacing in the film. For instance, in the book, Stephen's transformation into a vampire occurs much earlier on. And his relationship with Anne develops alongside this newfound power. Additionally, there are subplots involving secondary characters which provide further insight into Stephen's past and motivations that were left out of the movie.
That's really interesting to hear, Tom. I remember hearing about some changes being made from book to screen, but wasn't sure exactly what they entailed. It just goes to show how difficult it can be to adapt a story from one medium to another while still maintaining its integrity and capturing the essence of what makes it special in the first place. And speaking of differences, I also noticed that there were some subtle changes made to Stephen's appearance between the book and film versions of his character. Did you notice anything similar?
Exactly, Tom. In the book, Stephen is described as having a more rugged appearance with rough hands from his days working as a mechanic. His eyes are also portrayed as being slightly bloodshot, which adds to his overall air of danger and allure. In contrast, Jude Law's interpretation of the character in the film leans more towards an elegant, almost refined look that emphasizes Stephen's intellect and charm rather than his more rugged roots.
That's a fascinating comparison, Tim. It really does highlight how important casting can be when adapting a story for the screen, since it has such a significant impact on how audiences perceive the characters involved. And while we're on the subject of differences between book and film, what did you think about the ending of The Wisdom of Crocodiles? Personally, I felt that it was a bit abrupt compared to the novel, but still managed to pack an emotional punch nonetheless.
I have to say, Tom, I agree with your assessment regarding the abruptness of the film's ending in comparison to its literary counterpart. However, I also think that this abruptness served as a powerful reminder of just how fleeting life and love can be. It forced us as viewers to confront our own mortality while still grappling with the complex emotions stirred up by Stephen and Anne's tumultuous relationship. And ultimately, isn't that one of the main goals of great storytelling, to evoke strong emotions within us, regardless of whether those emotions are comfortable or not?
Well said, Tim. It just goes to show how truly universal these themes are and how effectively they can be communicated across different mediums. And speaking of which, What were some of your favorite scenes from either the book or film versions of the Wisdom of Crocodiles? For me personally, I think my favorite scene in both versions was when Stephen confesses his true nature to Anne at the beach house. The raw emotion and desperation in their performances really brought home just how far they had both fallen into this twisted web of love and obsession.
That's an excellent choice, Tom. I completely agree with you about that scene being a standout moment from both versions of the story. In fact, one of my favorite scenes from the book occurs earlier on when Stephen first discovers Anne's secret fascination with vampires through her research materials. It serves as a pivotal moment in their relationship where they begin to connect on a deeper level despite their initial reservations about each other. As for another favorite scene from the film, I think it has to be the final confrontation between Stephen and Anne at his hideout, where he reveals his true intentions behind their tumultuous affair. The tension between them is palpable, and Jacqueline McKenzie delivers an exactly chilling performance in that moment.
It's a great scene too, Tim. And speaking of chilling performances, I can't help but mention the incredible chemistry shared by both Jude Law and Jacqueline McKenzie throughout the Wisdom of Crocodiles. Their on-screen dynamic was exactly electrifying at times, yet also fraught with tension and danger, which only added to the overall allure of the film. It just goes to show how crucial casting can be when trying to bring a story like this to life on screen.
I completely agree, Tom. The chemistry between these two actors really elevated the Wisdom of Crocodiles to new heights, making their characters' twisted love affair all the more compelling and tragic. And while we may not have always agreed on certain aspects of this film or even its interpretation of some key themes, there's no denying that it remains a powerful and captivating piece of cinema that will continue to captivate audiences for years to come.
Indeed, Tim, Jude Law, and Jacqueline McKenzie's performances were undoubtedly one of the strongest aspects of the Wisdom of Crocodiles. Their ability to convey complex emotions with subtle nuances and facial expressions was truly remarkable. I particularly enjoyed how Jude Law portrayed the duality of Stephen's character. He effortlessly transitioned between charm, menace, and vulnerability, making it impossible for viewers not to be drawn into his twisted world.
Surely, Tom, Jude Law's portrayal of Stephen was nothing short of brilliant. His ability to convey both the allure and danger of his character made him irresistible, yet also terrifying at times. And Jacqueline McKenzie's performance as Anne was equally powerful. She managed to infuse her character with a sense of fragility and strength that made their relationship all the more compelling. I particularly enjoyed the way she played with the idea of femininity throughout the film, often appearing vulnerable, yet ultimately revealing herself to be far more resilient than she initially seemed.
It's true, Tim. Both Jude Law and Jacqueline McKenzie brought an incredible depth to their characters that elevated the Wisdom of Crocodiles from being just another thriller film. Their performances were layered with nuance and emotion, which made it impossible for viewers not to become invested in their story. And speaking of investment, I think this film also does a great job of exploring themes like obsession and the blurring lines between love and possession. As we watch Stephen and Anne's relationship unfold on screen, it becomes clear that there is more at stake here than just two people caught up in a passionate affair. They are both grappling with deep-seated issues surrounding identity, mortality, and the concept of true happiness.
Well said, Tom. These themes are indeed central to the Wisdom of Crocodiles and contribute greatly to its overall impact as a film. It's fascinating how director Poche Leong manages to balance these darker elements with moments of tenderness and vulnerability that keep us invested in Stephen and and story, even when their actions become increasingly disturbing. And speaking of the director, I think his decision to shoot much of the film using muted colors and soft lighting added an extra layer of unease, which perfectly complemented the story being told on screen.
It certainly did, Tim. The visual style of the Wisdom of Crocodiles was definitely one of its strongest assets, adding an eerie atmosphere that heightened the tension between characters. And while some viewers may have found certain aspects of this film to be overly dramatic or melodramatic, I think it's important to remember that part of its appeal lies in its willingness to push boundaries and explore darker themes. After all, as they say, art should challenge us rather than merely entertaining us.
That's a very poignant point, Tom. And while we may not always agree on certain aspects of films like The Wisdom of Crocodile, it's important to recognize their value in sparking conversations and debates about complex issues like love, obsession, and the nature of human connection. So here's to more films that push us out of our comfort zones and force us to confront uncomfortable truths. May they continue to enrich our lives and broaden our horizons.
Well, said Tim. And now let's shift gears slightly and discuss another interesting aspect of the Wisdom of Crocodiles, its artistic influences. As we all know, film is a medium that constantly draws inspiration from other forms of art such as literature, painting, and music in this case. I can't help but notice some clear parallels between Stephen's character in the film and one of my favorite literary anti-heroes, Heathcliff from Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights. Both characters are dark, brooding figures who embody an almost palpable sense of anger and despair, yet still manage to exert a powerful hold over those around them.
That's an excellent observation, Tom. I can certainly see the similarities between Stephen and Heathcliff in terms of their tortured natures and the way they seemingly manipulate those around them. And speaking of literary influences, I was also reminded of another classic novel while watching The Wisdom of Crocodiles, Dracula by Bram Stoker. There are several parallels between Stephen's vampiric tendencies and Count Dracula's thirst for human blood, not to mention the Gothic atmosphere that permeates both stories.
Unquestionably, Tim. The influence of Gothic literature is undeniable in The Wisdom of Crocodiles. From the moody cinematography to the haunting score, every aspect of this film seems designed to evoke a sense of foreboding and unease that's characteristic of classic Gothic tales. And then there are the themes themselves: obsession, mortality, the blurring line between life and death. These are all staples of the genre that find their way into Stephen and Anne's twisted love story.
Well said, Tom. It's fascinating how this film manages to draw upon so many different artistic influences while still maintaining its own unique identity. The Wisdom of Crocodiles is a true testament to the power of storytelling, how it can transcend mediums and resonate with audiences on such a profound level. And speaking of which, I'd love to hear your thoughts on what makes this film so enduring, despite its relatively modest commercial success upon release.
That's an excellent question, Tom. I think one of the reasons why The Wisdom of Crocodiles continues to captivate audiences is because it challenges us to confront our deepest fears and desires head-on. This film forces us to grapple with uncomfortable questions about love, obsession, and the lengths we might go to in order to preserve a sense of connection or identity. And while some viewers may find these themes disturbing or even off-putting, I believe they ultimately serve as a powerful reminder of our own humanity, both its darkest aspects and its capacity for resilience in the face of adversity.
Well said, Tom. It's certainly true that this film does an excellent job of exploring complex themes in a way that resonates with audiences on a deep emotional level. And while it may not have been everyone's cup of tea upon its initial release, I think The Wisdom of Crocodiles has aged quite well over time, thanks in part to its willingness to push boundaries and challenge our preconceptions about what constitutes good cinema. So here's to this underrated gem. May it continue to inspire discussions and debates for years to come.
Hear, hear, Tim. And now let's open up the floor for some questions from our lovely audience. Remember, everyone, please keep your comments concise and respectful. No spoilers.
Well, Tom, it seems we've reached the end of our discussion about The Wisdom of Crocodiles. It's been an enlightening, if at times contentious, conversation about this fascinating film. Personally, I feel that despite its flaws and potentially divisive themes, this is a movie that deserves to be watched and discussed by anyone with even a passing interest in cinema or the human condition.
Surely, Tim. I couldn't agree more. The Wisdom of Crocodiles might not be everyone's cup of tea, but it definitely has its merits as both an artistic achievement and an intriguing exploration of some very dark themes. And speaking of which, we'd love to hear your thoughts on the film in the comments section below. Did you find it as compelling as we did? What are some of your favorite scenes or moments from The Wisdom of Crocodiles?
Well said, Tom. As always, our listeners' opinions matter greatly to us. So please do leave your thoughts and reactions in the comments section below. We love hearing from you all. And speaking of which, if you enjoyed this episode of Tim and Tom's Film Nights, be sure to subscribe to our channel for more discussions about classic and contemporary films alike. Until next time, dear listeners, stay safe and keep supporting independent cinema.
That's right, Tim. Don't forget to hit the like button on this video too. It really helps us out and keeps us motivated to bring you more great content in the future. And finally, if there are any specific films or topics you'd like us to discuss in an upcoming episode, just let us know in the comments below. We love hearing from our amazing community, and we can't wait to see what the future holds for Tim and Tom's Film Nights.